These are some of the most popular TWS earphones today, and they've more or less settled in a similar price bracket. So I'm going to try and tell you which one is best for you. Hi guys and welcome back. If you would like to see more in-depth reviews of each of these earphones, I'll leave the links down below and I'll leave a card up here for you to click on. It's amazing what you can get in the sub 6K price bracket, considering all of these are absolutely feature packed. Some of them of course do have their positives and negatives. So let's jump straight into the review with their build. All these earphones come in a glossy finish, which clearly doesn't age very well. You can see this more so with the Nothings, as I've had these the longest. Having a transparent case doesn't really keep the magic of that alive when you're looking through a scratched surface. I expect that the scratches won't look as bad on the Realme case because it's white, whereas scratches on the black Z2 case will be more apparent. Their cases and earphones are at par when it comes to the overall build and detail. The Buds Z2 case is the only case that doesn't have a spring-loaded lid, so tends to sound the most subtle when it's being closed. The Nothings are the only ones here that have a metal hinge. The other two are plastic. The layouts of these cases are quite different from one another. I find that removing the Z2 from its case is the most annoying because of the way it's laid out. It just doesn't make any sense to me. Then the Realme earphones are just too slippery, and if you've got big fingers, there's no grip to pull them out. So I've resorted to plucking them out while pinching onto the silicone tips. The Nothings, despite having an off-axis layout, are the easiest to take out of their case. When it comes to their ingress levels, the Realme has a rating of IPX5, the Buds Z2 has a rating of IP55, and its case has a rating of IPX4. The Nothing has a rating of IPX4. The OnePlus is the only case that has an IP rating. All these earphones are quite similar on many fronts when it comes to their features. All have USB-C charging, ANC, ENC and Bluetooth version 5.2. The Z2 doesn't have its own app to control it. You have to use Hey Melody for that, whereas the Buds Air3 and Nothing use their own independent apps on iOS and Android. The Nothings are the only ones here that feature a wireless charging case and volume controls on the Buds. Where the Nothing does lose out is it doesn't have multi-device pairing. You can connect it to various devices, but you'll need to go into the device you want to connect it to. It only connects automatically to the last device you paired it with. The Buds Z2 can swap between the last two paired devices by pressing and holding the touch surface, whereas the Realme Buds have proper multi-device pairing. You can be connected to two devices at the same time and interact with the secondary device and have audio playback without any delay of switching over. I have faced an issue with my set though. Every time I use my primary device and I interact with the secondary one, it pauses the audio on my primary device. Not that I've engaged any audio on the secondary device. I hope this can be addressed in a future update. It's still usable though and a nice feature to have, and I'm surprised this feature has been made possible in a budget set of earphones. To test this out, I left my fan on medium, not too slow or not too fast, and I also did leave a few windows open so traffic noises were bleeding in. The Buds Z2 seemed to let in a little bit of a higher pitch in than the Realme. Both handle their ANC maximum modes really well. Because the Z2 lets in a little noise, I'd say this doesn't do as well as the other two. Between the Nothings and the Realme, both do a terrific job of cutting off fan motor noises and traffic noises that were bleeding in, but the Realme tends to pick up a lot of wind noise from the air that's being blown onto you from the fan. The Nothings barely pick that up, which makes that a win for the Nothings in the ANC department. And how do these do with their ENC? There's only one way to find out. So I'm standing near the usually busy street where I do all of these call tests, just to give you essence of what the noise is like here with the traffic. There's a bit of construction going on at the back and some road work. So let's see how all these earphones fare. I will be comparing all of them three, so all three of them. So right now I'm wearing the Realme Buds 3, so I'll switch over from the camera audio to the Realme Buds 3 right about now. So the last time I checked it, it didn't seem too great to be handling new things, and I figured that these are the only earphones in this comparison that actually have just two microphones. The others have three. So obviously that one extra microphone is pulling in data from
the noise around, which is able to help the AI sort of modulate the noise a little more. So maybe those two earphones sound a bit better, but I'm going to leave this entirely up to you. So this has been the Realme Buds Air 3, and I'll be switching over to the OnePlus Buds G2 right about now. So one thing to keep in mind is while I'm doing this testing with all these earphones, I am keeping all of them on their maximum ANC mode. If you do want to see, where I shift between transparency and maximum ANC while I'm on a call, I think I've done this for all of them in the in-depth reviews. Maybe you can give them a view if you'd like to see that much detail. Hopefully, this does give you a good idea of how the OnePlus Buds Z2 fare against the Realme. Like I mentioned, this does have three microphones, so it should be a bit better than the Realme. And I will now move on to the Nothing Ear ones right about now. And this should give you a pretty good comparison of how each of these actually handle this same environment with vehicles passing by, people honking. There is a certain amount of ambient noise with the leaves blowing up against each other and so on. There's a bit of a breeze right now because it looks like it's going to rain, so I'll try and wrap this up. So, hopefully, this call test has benefited you in some way. I hope it helps you make some sort of buying decision. One thing to keep in mind is I have updated all of these earphones onto their latest softwares, so it should give you a general idea as to how they fare presently with their latest softwares. And of course, I will see you back at the studio.
All three of these earphones support SBC and AAC. The Realme Buds Air 3 come with a 10mm driver, the Buds Z2 comes with an 11mm driver, and the Nothing Ear ones come with an 11.6mm driver. Now on a volume front, the Realmes have never sounded like they're being amped too well. The Nothings are like Goldilocks earphones here. They sound just right at 50% volume, whereas the Z2 is just way too loud for my liking. In fact, the other two earphones have to be at 90% and above to match the Z2 at 50%. They're even too loud at 5% volume, so I've only used them once or twice to try and fall asleep at night, and even at just 5%, they're too loud. The Nothings and Realmes let me calm down, and I prefer either of them to lull myself to sleep. All these earphones are very similar when it comes to their sound stage. Their stages exist in a bubble within your head, but the Z2 seems to have the narrowest of stages here. It's more focused between your ears than the Nothing and the Realme. The Nothing and Realme tend to give you an illusion of some tones coming from slightly further out of the earphones and do have a slight vertical stage. The Z2 handles imaging with a slight veil in front of them. Details in audio aren't as crisp as they should be. It's really close between the Realme and Nothings here. Focusing on finer details is easier on both these earphones compared to the Z2, but it's the Nothings that just inch away from the Realmes and have slightly better definition in imaging. High frequencies come off a bit mellow from the Z2 and they don't sound quite as rich as I'd like. The Realme have a tighter and more excited way of delivering their highs at you, whereas the Nothings tend to sound the most natural amongst the three earphones. All of them certainly have a boosted high frequency range, but somehow the Nothings are tuned in a way where the highs don't seem in your face. I listened to Dave Matthews Band's Crash Into Me, and the soft cymbal hits in that song's intro makes it ever so clear how well the Nothings handle this range. They're prim, proper and sophisticated compared to the other two earphones, as if they are a seasoned set and know full well what they're supposed to do. Mid frequencies are recessed when you consider how each of these are tuned, but they do vary a little from one another. The Z2s tend to sound the most recessed amongst the three, but are clear enough to enjoy vocals. The Realmes are a lot more forward than the Z2s, so much so they tend to be a little sibilant with some recordings. The Nothings also handle their mids with a forward approach compared to the Z2, almost the same as the Realme in fact, but they stay away from being sibilant, so there won't be any listening fatigue with these over time for sure. Listening to Adele's Easy On Me, the Realme presents her voice as a thin and nasal sound. The Z2 do make her voice sound a lot more rounded, but the Nothings present her in a more natural and truer tone, which some people will appreciate. Lower frequencies is where the story starts changing a bit between these three. The Realme seem to be docile when they handle their low frequencies. They're not enjoyable majority of the time, but when you skip over to a better recorded track, this range suddenly gets a bit lively, but can sound a bit boomy for some people, I'm sure. The Buds Z2 take over this range with vigor, almost as if they're trying to make up for everything else they lacked. The bass is heavy weighted and can certainly spring a smile on any bass enthusiast. The Nothings approach bass in a slightly less aggressive manner. They don't hold back at all. In fact, they're almost at par with the Z2, but have a certain charisma to them with how they handle this frequency range. Listening to Shawn Mendes' Lost in Japan, all these earphones put on a very good front for how they handle their bass, but I have to lean towards the Nothing because of how well they carry themselves here. Now, one thing to keep in mind is how all of these earphones are tuned. Everybody's doing this. The V-shaped tuning is the most appealing form of tuning, especially for the masses. The issue being boosted highs and upper mids can cause sibilance. Take the Realme's for example, classic case. Then you have recessed lower mids. Some handle these better than others. And then of course you have the accentuated bass. All these earphones have that accentuated bass. And now what's the issue with accentuated bass? When there is an overabundance of the lower frequency, it tends to eat into the mid and higher frequencies. So the Z2 is a classic example of how accentuated bass starts eating into the mid and higher frequencies. Now when it comes to EQ modes, it's only the Nothing and the Realmes that have their own EQ modes in their own apps. The Realme has Bass Boost Plus mode, which makes it sound obnoxious. I didn't like it at all. It has a bright mode, which gets a little too brittle for my liking, and it has a balanced mode, which I find sounds the best of the three profiles. The Nothings have a balanced mode, which I always leave on for good reason, more treble mode, which tweaks their highs, but doesn't make them unbearable to listen to. Bass mode makes them sound closer to the Z2, but still has a class about how it delivers this range. And it also has a voice mode, which is more for audiobook consumption. So to sum up, when it comes to their build, all these earphones have a very similar finish, but the Nothings, because of their see-through case, in the long run tend to look really awful, and they just lose their charm about how they appear. They are the only ones that have a metal hinge, so I presume long term it won't wear out. I have not had any issues with mine lately, and I've had these, maybe I'm pushing up against 9 months now, so I need to do a long-term report on that. But so far the build of the Nothing seems to be pretty good. The other two I have are still fairly new, so I will be coming up with long-term reports on those. But they will also pick up scratches in the long run. Any glossy set of earphones I've had in the past look absolutely awful after 3 to 5 months of use, especially if you're someone who keeps putting the case in your pocket or a bag and it gets tossed around. Matte is the way to go. I don't know why manufacturers aren't doing it yet. Although I think Realme has two different other finishes, both of which are kind of matte, so that should scratch less than the glossy finish. On a feature front, I'd say the Nothings trump the other two earbuds with wireless charging and the volume slider controls. And another neat feature it does have is Find My Earbuds. So if you're somebody who tends to lose your earphones under a cushion, or you're somewhere in the office or in your room, you can always go into the Nothing app and ping it just to be able to locate it. The one thing I do think that the Nothing is really missing out on right now is the multi-device pairing. So the Z2 has tried to do this with pressing and holding one side, so you can swap to the secondary device and swap back later to the primary. But it's a bit fiddly because it takes a little while to jump from device to device. Whereas the Realme, they've actually got it right, because you are synced to two devices simultaneously. So you can forget about the whole pressing a button to swap. You can just have both devices Bluetooth on, and you can just pick up whichever device you want to interact with. It works pretty flawlessly. I have had my issues with it, but honestly, if you're just using one device at a time, it's no issue. I presume they're going to fix the issue I had in a software update, but I presume this specific feature with the Realme is genuinely their USP. So when it comes to their sound, I think this is a no-brainer. The Nothings have handled themselves brilliantly since the day they were launched up until now. But I am not going to crown one or the other a winner, because each of these earphones actually cater towards different audiences. Now let's keep in mind that audio is terrifically subjective. The way you perceive sound and I perceive sound are going to be completely different. But I've always felt that the Z2s have always been targeted more toward a bass enthusiast. So if you're somebody who likes EDM or anything heavy metal music or anything like that kind of genre, you're going to love listening to the Z2, because that kind of music is genuinely enjoyable with those. So if you listen to that kind of audio and you pick up the Realmes and the Nothings, they might seem to fall flat. They'll sound a bit too thin. The Z2s would definitely be for you. When it comes to the Realmes, I'd say they've tried to be an all-round kind of earphones, but they're kind of picky. They're not quite sure what they want to do. Their sound has been kind of on the fence, because with some music, it sounds like they're very flat with the bass. With other music, it sounds like the bass is a little too overpowering. So I don't think they've been tuned really quite well to have their own character. They're kind of on the fence about what they're trying to do. But the one thing they genuinely do really well is their multi-device pairing. And I think this will help a lot of people, especially who want to keep swapping between their computer and phone if they're going to handle online meetings, working from home and so on. Now, the Nothings are targeted at an audience that wants a better audio delivery, more precision listening, and generally a nicer, natural tone of music. And of course, you do have the plus points of having wireless charging and the whole volume slider thing. It's a massive convenience. At least I've always really liked earphones that have that volume slider, because then you don't really need to interact with your phone much. So if I'm being honest, the Nothings have had their fair share of issues. I'm sure you've heard about the issues they've had. They have been very buggy, they have been very glitchy. Now, in my personal experience, I've had them almost for 8 or 9 months now. That specific glitch that I had, where they just cut off for a very brief second, like literally maybe 0.8 or 0.9 of a second while I'm absorbing content, it'll just go silent and then it'll resume. That used to happen every 10 to 15 minutes, which could be really annoying. But after the last software update with them, I've had this issue maybe once or twice, and it's kicked in maybe once in every 1 or 2 hours. So it's okay to live with that. I prefer the sound of these over that glitch any day. I think the pros outweigh the cons. So I'm pretty happy with the Nothings actually. So now when it comes to their pricing, the pricing does keep fluctuating, especially when you have some of those online sales going on. So at the time of recording this, the Nothings are going for about 5,999. The Buds Z2 are going for about 4,999, and the Buds Air3 are going for 3,999. So would I recommend any of these earphones to you? Like I said, these earphones are catered to different audiences. So don't make the mistake of going for the Nothings if you're a bass head. And if you like finer detail and get genuine enjoyment out of better imaging and natural tone, don't go for the Buds Z. When it comes to the call tests also, these things are very important to you. You guys can make your decision yourself basis all the demos that I've provided. But in my case, I think I'm going to be taking the Nothings back to bed with me. So if you've stayed this long, I presume you do like the content on my channel, and I really hope my review has helped you make a purchase decision. And of course, if you would like to support the channel, you know exactly how to do that. And thank you, of course, for tuning into Paul's POV for some sound advice.